And I think that understanding the impact of the global war on terror through the eyes of families and people who've been directly affected by the injustices that our criminal justice systems are operating through is a very powerful way of understanding what's going on. And I think now we are going to open up the floor for questions of Farida and Hamza. Victoria is going to translate for Farida. So I will take some questions now. Yes.
Assalamu alaikum. My question is for the Farida.
Can you make it loud, please?
Yeah. Did you have a lot of problem getting sympathy and support from the Moroccan human rights infrastructure? Was it difficult to?
Les organisations qui soutiennent pour les droits de l'homme au Maroc, elles se penchent sur l'affaire de l'Ali, mais ça ne fait absolument pas le poids par rapport au système, au régime marocain. Ça ne fait vraiment pas le poids.
She's saying that the Moroccan human rights organizations support very strongly all the work that she and the family are doing.
Ils ne font pas le poids.
But the problem is they don't really have the weight to make an impact on the regime.
Thank you.
Do you want to follow that up for you with some words?
Par rapport aux organisations marocaines de droits de l'homme, je pourrais dire que déjà pour les avocats marocains, il est très très difficile de plaider de la même manière que des avocats étrangers parce que
she's just explaining a bit more that for the Moroccan lawyers, it's very, very difficult for them to have the same weight as foreign lawyers would have if they were before the Moroccan court.
Et ça sans tenir compte du fait que déjà le jugement, la plaidoirie et toutes les audiences qui ont lieu ne servent relativement à rien, vu que, comme l'avait dit Luc donc dans le documentaire, c'est comme si tout était déjà décidé, planifié.
Yeah, she's saying that the real problem is that it's almost as though the court cases are completely pointless, because from the very beginning it's quite clear what the outcome is going to be and that everything has been decided before they even get into the court.
I wonder, Farida, would you mind talking a little bit about Ali and the whole process that you as a family have been through? Ali's experience of detention, arrest, extradition, and his torture.
Est-ce que tu peux parler de la famille et de Ali lui-même, un peu des expériences de ces années depuis qu'il a été arrêté?
Enfin, je vais parler essentiellement de Ali. Commencer.
She's going to start by talking about Ali before she talks about the family.
Il a été mis en détention, en isolation totale, donc sensorielle, temporelle, en Espagne.
He was put in complete solitary confinement in his cell in Spain.
Et ça pendant 2 ans, 8 mois et demi.
2 years, 8.5 months.
Il a dû développer des capacités de pouvoir se maintenir en vie parce qu'il disait que ça le poussait à devenir fou. Le fait de ne pas avoir quelqu'un avec qui dialoguer.
He had to really find a way to hold himself together, because right from the beginning he said, in these conditions it's really difficult not to go mad, but he found those ways.
Donc comme il n'y avait aucun contact humain, même la nourriture on l'a lui passée sous la porte, donc par
He had no human contact whatsoever. Even the food was put through a slot in the door for him.
De ce fait-là, donc, il a développé des capacités qui sont les suivantes. Il se parlait à lui-même, donc il dialoguait avec sa propre personne.
He developed this technique of talking to himself and making a dialogue with himself.
Ouais. il devait se toucher, c'était très important pour lui de se toucher.
And he also touched himself, he touched his body.
Et donc, il a aussi fait des tentatives pendant ces 2 ans, 8 mois et demi. Il a fait en tout 3 grèves de la faim.
During this period, the 2 years and 8.5 months, he did 3 hunger strikes.
Donc, c'était le seul moyen qui lui restait de se battre de l'intérieur de la prison, de dénoncer ces discriminations et de réclamer qu'il était innocent.
These hunger strikes were the only technique he had to affirm his innocence and to be able to fight from inside the prison.
Lors de la 3e grève de la faim, donc il a commencé alors qu'il avait appris qu'il allait être extradé. Donc le Conseil des ministres espagnol avait décidé de son extradition au Maroc.
During the 3rd hunger strike, he heard that the Spanish had decided that the extradition would go through.
Et il était à 26 jours de grève de la faim lorsqu'il a été extradé.
He was on the 26th day of the hunger strike.
Donc on ajoute à ces 26 jours les 12 jours de garde à vue au cours desquels il a été sauvagement torturé.
And if you add on to that the 12 days when he had been held at the beginning and really savagely tortured.
Alors pendant ces 12 jours, c'est 12 jours de torture intensive, jour et nuit avec un relais, donc on ne le permet pas de dormir.
During the torture, he was tortured both in the day and the night, and there was a changing of the guards to torture him, but he never had a single space in between. The torture was intensive and continued.
Et donc le moyen utilisé par ces tortionnaires de le garder debout, on ne va pas dire que c'était pour le remettre en forme, mais juste pour le garder éveillé, c'était de lui injecter des produits dans les veines.
In order to keep him awake during that period when he was not allowed to sleep, they injected him with some substances that he doesn't know what it was.
Ali m'a décrit que la sensation qu'il avait lors de ces piqûres, c'était le remettre donc à l'état d'une sorte de zombie. Il devenait fou, il avait l'impression que tout allait exploser en lui.
He explained to Farida, described the feeling of what happened when these injections were made to him, and it made him feel a bit like a zombie, going slightly mad, and he just was almost like exploding inside.
Pour donner juste quelques détails qu'ils aient une idée de comment est-ce que le Maroc se torture, et c'est répétitif, c'est similaire pour quasi tous les cas de personnes qui sont en
She's just emphasising that as is it's routine in this Moroccan torture that these same techniques are used all the time on people.
Donc c'est de les accrocher par les mains, donc avec des cordes, on les accroche comme ça.
And one thing is with the hands are tied like this at the wrist
Et on les pend donc au plafond.
and hung from the ceiling.
Et pendant ce temps-là, ils sont à 16, donc Ali il a compté 16 gardes. Ils étaient à 16 à les frapper avec des très très gros bâtons.
And they're beaten in this position.
On change de position, on le pend par les pieds également. Et on
Sometimes it's upside down and he's hung up by his feet and equally beaten in the same way.
Il y a les tentatives de noyade, donc on va le noyer jusqu'à ce qu'il tombe dans l'inconscience.
And then there are these attempts to drown him, putting his head into a bucket of water.
Il y a les brûlures par des cigarettes au niveau des parties intimes.
And then there's the cigarette burns all over his private parts.
Électrocution aussi au niveau des parties intimes.
And electric shocks, similarly.
Il y a le viol anal à l'aide de bouteilles.
And he's also sodomized with a bottle.
Perhaps I'll move on to Hamja. If you wouldn't mind saying a few words, Hamja, before we then open it up for questions.
Thank you all for coming. We didn't think that many people would turn up. I mean, the first time I watched that film, which you've just seen, was the day before European Court of Human Rights issued their very negative verdict. can't explain how devastating that was for my family. And also prior to that, I sort of, when I did the interview for that film, I thought, oh, this is like the worst interview I've ever done in my life. But subsequently, I realised there's a space I could actually be vulnerable, and I couldn't be in Al Jazeera and CNN and whoever was interviewing us at the time. Dala's now obviously been extradited, so every disturbing thing Gareth described and everything she says she'll be disappointed about and everything I said I've had nightmares about is his current situation. Yeah, Dala's in pre-trial isolation. His trial has been moved forward from October this year to March next year. So he's spent 7 years now, 7 years in July the 19th in detention without trial, and at least like about a year and a half in pre-trial solitary confinement. There's a lot of current campaigning around Guantanamo Bay, especially with the hunger strike there. But there's precedents within, I mean, all these horrific prisons are like Guantanamo Bay and Abu Ghraib are extensions of the domestic supermax system within the United States. I mean, I'm talking every procedure. Let's take forced feeding, which occurs in prisons like ADX Florence. Forced cell extraction, which effectively means gassing a cell out till someone chokes nearly to death to remove them, is practiced. Normally there are 80,000 people in solitary confinement in the United States. Bradley Manning's treatment is not unusual in any respect at all. So I think we need to take any campaigning against closure of Guantanamo further, since these things have precedents. I take a lot of strength from a very British trajectory of family campaigns that, you know, which might include Hillsborough, Janet Alder, who's campaigned for her brother for 14 years, who was murdered or killed by police in custody. Even the minors, things like that. Because really, they're the ones who protect civil liberties and government accountability for us all. And you know, there's a few things we have as families which our political representatives do not have. The first one being courage, and I cannot think of many MPs who possess that. I'll make an exception for Caroline Lucas, who actually spoke at our first event with State Crime Initiative and has also paid tribute to the family's courage, even within Parliament. And another thing we have is loyalty. We'll always stick by our family members, and you know, we're not going to sell out basic civil liberties or centuries worth of civil liberties since Magna Carta and habeas corpus just for a convenient military alliance or just for a friendship such as the Blair-Bush era and declaration of infinite war. And another thing we have is longevity and sort of persistence. You know, the Hillsborough family lost at the European Court of Human Rights, which is not something we even remember very well. In the current climate, David Cameron and Theresa May, who all boasted about and were pleased about what happened to my brother, such as at the Conservative Party conference this year, where Theresa May said, wasn't it great to say goodbye to those 4 others? There's, you know, should we withdraw from the European Court of Human Rights? And in reaction, we as progressive people or justice-seeking people, you know, stand by the European Court of Human Rights, but we should really be critical friends, given that they have legitimised supermax isolation, in my brother's judgment. Funny enough, when Julian Assange's attorney spoke, Michael Ratner, who's another of the Centre for Constitutional Rights, and he was asked, you know, why doesn't Julian take his case to the European Court of Human Rights? And the case he actually referred to was our case, as in Edward Fitzgerald, who represented my brother at some points, who's part of Doherty Street Chambers, and also representing Gary McKinnon, says this European judgment effectively, attempts to challenge American prison conditions, which are some of the worst in the world, and are effectively not going to be effective anymore. I'd like to say something hopeful. Dalla still maintains a sense of humour. He still... There's a particular healing effect a prisoner has on the family. So when my parents went to visit Dalla, it'd be him who'd comfort my mother and father and even counsel me. That aspect has been removed, and all phone calls are monitored, so there's no privacy anymore, or all letters are monitored too. There's a mailing list going around somewhere, and a card to Dalla, and I can't sort of emphasize the importance of writing prison, so please do sign it. I don't know what to say to finish. Well, Dalla said to his family on his final family visit, which was horrifically painful for my mum and my father. I'm a steady ship of justice in a sea of overwhelming injustice, which is a nice way to remember his courage and dignity.
Well, thank you very much. I'm just inviting Aaron and Luke to join the panel, and I would welcome some more questions of Farida and Hamza, if you have them, and I would expect Luke and Aaron to chip in, and then they will also make contributions. Are there any more questions? Here and then over here.
I just wanted to ask, how can you still have faith in the European Court of Human Rights, and everybody here, how can you still have faith in the European Court of Human Rights when they didn't even spell your brother's name right in the final judgment?
Yeah, so just to clarify, in the first judgment in April last year, they called my brother, whose name is Saeed, which is probably one of the most common Muslim names, as Celia, which was then repeated in all the press and publicity, and then did that again when the case went to the Grand Chamber. When a case goes to the Grand Chamber, you can't add any additional facts to the case, and 95% of cases fell. But there was one positive thing that came out of the European Court of Human Rights, which is the judgment on Haroon Aswat, who was given earlier this year. The Haroon Aswat suffers from severe schizophrenia, and my brother actually witnessed his mental breakdown in Long Lartin when he stopped consuming food and dropped the Quran to the floor, and he's in Broadmoor at the moment. So he won his European Court judgment. But within the crossfire, so you get right-wing organisations like the Heritage Foundation, within the crossfire of criticism that comes from right-wing sources, you do actually have some sort of residue of truth. So, they point out how hypocritical it is, because in Haroon Aswat's judgment, there's acknowledgement of forced speeding, which is occurring in Buchanan right now, which goes against all medical ethics and international law. So that's perfectly fine for all the prisoners, of course not. And I still think we should stand by the sort of... There's no way Britain should unilaterally withdraw from the European Court of Human Rights. And Janet Alder, who's actually speaking with me next month as a special guest for my brother's anniversary, she challenged the deaths in custody and got the government to admit they were wrong, which is a great thing. But I think all these pressures from the Conservative government to withdraw from the European Court of Human Rights, which they've admitted would be devastating, are what in effect produce bargaining chips or erroneous judgments too.
Thank you. Woman over here, Natasha.
I just wanted to ask about, because we know the US prison system is based on the profit motive, and I'm new to this, so I was not aware of Supermax until I met the ICA a week ago. So I just wonder what American US doctors' organisations are saying about Supermax. And I mean, obviously we know that torture is illegal, but that doesn't seem to matter. But I just wondered how doctors in the US are relating to people held under these conditions. If there's 80,000.
Yeah, there's lots of doctors and psychiatrists. If you go to the website Solitary Watch, I did my first event with State Crime Initiative last month. Some of the same people here, so I'm sorry to repeat myself. You can go to Solitary Watch or Sharon Shavlev, who's an expert based at LSE, who will provide you with all the sources for it. There's a lot of religious campaigning, multi-faith religious campaigning against solitary confinement in the United States. It was actually, the press about the European Court judgment was absolutely really good within the United States. The best article was probably in The Nation, called A European Court Gives a Green Light to Torture by G. Theo Harris, which you can all Google and find online, which is probably the best critique. And another article written in the New Statesman recently by Dr. Ian Patel of International State Crime Initiative, called The Impossible Justice of Dulha's Extradition, which you'll find online if you just Google New Statesman Dulha, which talk about all the politics. It says 26 human rights organisations within the United States, including Human Rights First, which is a really mainstream, even slightly pro-Obama human rights NGO, Centre for Constitutional Rights, which is a lot better. It's quite a radical NGO, but it was absolutely brilliant and it's essential reading. And American Civil Liberties Union being the biggest, they all objected to the European Court judgment. And there's plenty of good writing, whether in the British context there was this figure called Abu Hamza and the Others, which the Home Office just invented to smear everyone, even though there were separate cases. There's ample material. And the most strenuous campaigns against solitary confinement are actually within America itself, which most people here aren't really aware of. So, and some of them are fantastically creative. So you have Tam's Year 10, which was a group of artists who would write to prisoners in solitary with images of landscapes they'd like to see and so forth. And they actually ended up getting the Supermax prison closed. And states like Maine have closed Supermax prison solitary confinement by up to about 65%. Under international law guidelines, it is actually wrong. So the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture, Juan Mendes, tried to intervene and save the UK government. You're effectively, things like SAMS and pre-trial solitary do amount to torture. The UK government just chose not to listen to them. I mean, and it's the same guy, Juan Mendes, has visited Ali Aras in prison in Morocco, which Farida will probably tell you about in more depth. But the one thing you have to give credit to the Moroccan thing I don't like to, is that at least they gave him the right to visit the actual prison. The United States actually barred him from visiting Supermax prisons in the United States, and they also barred Amnesty International from things. At the front there I've got an excellent, sorry to talk so long, report which you can just pick up there for free, which is Amnesty International's report on Supermax prisons in California. So just pick that up, and it's amply full of sources and academics. Sorry.
I wonder, Aaron, if you'd like to come in on that point.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything Hannah just said is absolutely right about the kind of energy around the prisons issue generally in the US, and a lot of different kinds of campaign groups and different kinds of communities are coming together. Especially over the last 2 years, I was at a meeting in Riverside Church in New York towards the end of last year. I would say it was about 1,000 people coming to hear people talking about how we can abolish prisons in the United States. So there is a lot of energy around it. You know, the Supermax is a normal part of American prisons. It's not an exceptional thing for so-called terrorist cases. And if you've read an amazing book by someone called Michelle Alexander called The New Jim Crow, you can then you can understand that what's happening in the United States with the criminal justice system is you know, a form of institutional racism that perpetuates the long history of segregation and slavery in the United States. You know, amongst the people who are being held in the Supermaxes that are designated for for suspected terrorists. Are people like Jamil Alamin, who's formerly known as A-Track Brown, former leader of the Black Panther Party and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee from the 1960s, right? So there's continuities there going back to COINTELPRO, the counter-subversion program against black nationalism and civil rights movement. And people are beginning to understand these connections now, right? It was meant to be that after 9/11 it was a new era, new enemies, but people are understanding that actually it's a continuation.